Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to take a look at the first weekend of playoff action for the Overwatch League 2020 season. We have seen 10 teams eliminated from playoff contention. Only half of the league is still in the hunt for the championship. Some surprising teams in there. Let's jump in and talk about who is remaining here in the playoffs. And let's take a look at what has happened so far in this playoffs. And let us start in Asia, where we only, of course, have 7 teams competing. The region obviously started with a match between the Chengdu Hunters and the London Spitfire, which the Chengdu Hunters were able to win. They took that one 3-1. Moving into the second day of matches in Asia, the NYXL were able to beat the Chengdu Hunters 3-2, a very close series there. The Seoul Dynasty able to beat the Hangzhou Spark 3-0. And in the third day of matches, the Shanghai Dragons with a 3-1 victory over the NYXL, but it should be noted 3-1 in 5 maps, a draw on King's Row. And the Seoul Dynasty with a 3-0 win over the Guangzhou Charge. Really good look from the Seoul Dynasty. I was kind of curious after the NYXL Chengdu Hunters match and Seoul Dynasty Hangzhou Spark match. Shanghai had chosen New York for their opponent as opposed to choosing the Seoul Dynasty. And, you know, there's kind of two different things you can look at there. Moon, I know he said, he didn't like say too much or look into it too much. He said, hey, it's just the opponent we feel more confident playing against. Whether or not that was just because of New York's performance against Chengdu or because of the way Seoul had been playing in scrims, who knows? But the Seoul Dynasty look really good. They looked very good this weekend. Going back to the Marvel Gesture tank line, with Gesture playing a lot of Roadhog, Marvel on the Sigma a lot of the time. It's a really interesting tank line. One we're not seeing from a ton of teams in the league right now. I think, honestly, the Seoul Dynasty might be the team who are doing it the most. So I'm really interested to see what the Seoul Dynasty team is able to do next weekend when they play against the Shanghai Dragons, who looked somewhat weak. Well, I won't say weak. New York looked very good against Shanghai. New York did not look as good against Chengdu. I don't put a ton of stock into that, just because I think Chengdu is such a good team at what they do best, and I think that Chengdu's style of play is perfect for what New York is. New York is a team that really heavily relies on being disciplined, strong in their kind of coordination. And Chengdu are just chaos, and I think that they are kind of the epitome of what New York wants to be. So when you look at the way New York played against Shanghai, which was a very close series, King's Row could have gone either way. New York actually had the better offense on King's Row, but just fell short on defense. It was interesting to see, and I think there's some interesting stuff going on with New York. This meta doesn't really play much into New York's strengths as a team. Haxal's Sombra has been iffy. It's had some good moments. It's been decent at times. But for the most part, the NYXL have looked pretty good. SBB has been playing the long-range hit scan. He's been playing the Ashe, the McCree, at times. I think he played a little bit of Widowmaker on Havana against Chengdu. We also saw Libero come in to play some Widowmaker. I don't know what is going on with Nene. I don't know if they just don't feel as comfortable playing Nene, if Nene is just unable to play. I don't really know what's going on. It's interesting, and I'm curious to see what New York is able to do when they play Guangzhou next weekend. But I think it's really interesting, and I think New York actually looks really good and really clean. They made Shanghai play for their win. And I don't think that it was necessarily New York running a really good counter composition or Shanghai playing poorly. Like, Shanghai was winning, and Shanghai was very clearly winning this series for the most part. But New York was very good against Shanghai. Probably the best we've seen them play against Shanghai all season. Even considering that last 3-1 series they had in the regular season, and that 3-2 reverse sweep that the Shanghai Dragons had. I thought New York looked better this series than they've ever looked against Shanghai. I think this is the best New York we've seen in a while. And I think they are scary. I think that Guangzhou looked pretty weak against Seoul. And I think if you're Guangzhou, you get the benefit, obviously, of having another week to scrim, to practice, to get yourselves into position to hopefully have a good performance next weekend against New York. But New York also has that same week, and they have a week to polish their play. I think this is going to be a really interesting region next week, or this upcoming weekend, and I cannot wait to break it down and whatnot. But I won't give any predictions or anything just yet. That will happen later this week. But this is a very interesting group of teams. 4 best teams in Asia. I know I picked Hangzhou to win against Seoul, but Hangzhou have been playing pretty well. But playoff Seoul is really, really good. The Seoul Dynasty, as I've been saying all season, don't care about the regular season. They care about the playoffs. They are going to do everything in their power to make it to the playoffs. They are a good enough team to make it to the playoffs, and they have not dropped a map yet in this playoffs. They look clinical, and they look very comfortable. They have creative in on the flex support, which is very interesting. This is a very good-looking Seoul Dynasty team, and I think that they are a team that is certainly going to threaten the Shanghai Dragons. If Seoul can find a way to beat the Shanghai Dragons in the winners' finals, they are a team that are going to be capable of beating anybody in the grand finals if they can make it. I think they are certainly a team to look out for, and I am curious to see what the Seoul Dynasty are able to do next weekend, but like I said, we'll talk about that when we get there. Let's move on from Asia, and let's go to North America, where all the crazy stuff happened. Obviously, the first day was relatively interesting with the Boston Uprising beating the Houston Outlaws 3-1. Washington Justice with a dominant 3-0 victory over the Vancouver Titans, which I wasn't really surprised by. LA Gladiators with a close win over the Toronto Defiant. Atlanta Reign with a somewhat close game against the Boston Uprising. It was the type of game where Atlanta was in control pretty much the whole game, but Boston did have a couple good moments here and there. And the Washington Justice, once again, dominant victory over the Dallas Fuel. Decay on Zarya has just been incredible all playoffs. And I will keep talking about Decay and the Washington Justice here in a little bit. But with the Dallas Fuel, I want to touch on what we saw go on Twitter. Obviously, after the match, we saw Crimzo with a couple tweets about Decay. We saw Doha with a tweet about Decay. We just saw kind of the banter between Decay and Doha. I want to make a video talking about this on Wednesday, so be on the lookout for that. I am going to have a video going out where I just talk a bit about what to make of this situation between Decay and the Dallas Fuel and what it means, but it is a very interesting situation. But the Washington Justice have looked really, really good. And as we move into the double elimination bracket, you can see the Philadelphia Fusion have been incredibly dominant. A 3-0 victory over the Gladiators, a 3-0 victory over the LA Valiant, just completely mastering this Sombra Reaper playstyle. We saw a map of Carpe against the LA Gladiators, and that was it. You have in the Mayhem versus Valiant match a really close series there between two teams who kind of had similar playstyles. They were both running the same composition. They were running the Sombra Reaper as well. And those two teams were pretty close together in the way they played, but ultimately the Fusion just dismantled the winner of that one, which was the Valiant, who just continued to dominate their series with the Florida Mayhem this season. But the big match, I would say, from Saturday was the San Francisco Shock reverse sweeping the Washington Justice. There was a world where the Washington Justice 3-0'd the San Francisco Shock if they were able to pull out one map against them. It was a very close series. The Shock able to pull it off in the end, of course, but the Justice look really, really, really good on the Zarya Hog compositions. Decay is able to flex onto the Zarya, which is his best hero, arguably, that he has. And Janu's Hog has been very good. And Stitch and Tuba have been incredible. Stitch in particular has really impressed me. He has been amazing so far in this postseason, and he is a huge reason why this Justice team is finding so much success and why they were able to push the Shock to 5 maps. It is incredible to watch this Justice team play. Their take on the meta might not be the most common, and it might not be the best option. They run the Ashe, Sombra, Zarya, Roadhog with Mercy and Zenyatta, and it might not be the best composition that exists. They also run the Ana sometimes too, instead of the Zenyatta. But it works for them so well because it's all of the players on their strengths. Arc's best hero is the Mercy. Hands down, he's one of the best Mercies in the league. Aim God is able to play the Zenyatta, play the Ana heroes that he's able to frag out on and really perform at a high level there. Decay's Zarya is incredible. Janu's Hog has looked really good. And Stitch has looked, like I said, reinvigorated on that Ashe. And Tuba's Sombra has been very good as well. So this Justice team really does look really good. They push the Justice to the edge. We'll talk about how they performed then on Sunday in the losers bracket. But it was a really, really good look from the Justice this weekend, and they are a really dangerous team. The other match in the first round of the losers bracket was the Paris Eternal, or winners bracket, sorry. Paris Eternal taking on the Atlanta Reign. The Atlanta Reign pulled that one off 3-2. It was a close series. The Eternal did not look great. They didn't really look like they had a grasp on the meta. They didn't really look like they knew how to play in this style. It didn't favor their strengths. They had Sparkle playing the Sombra, and it's just not his role. I think that Soon would have been the better option if they could have put him there. But they opted to go with Sparkle, and it just didn't really work. And I think that was kind of where they struggled the most. And when it got down to the losers bracket, they couldn't handle Washington, which, like, saying that should sound crazy and it should sound bizarre, and like the fact that the Washington Justice, right, there's 10 teams left in the Overwatch League. There's 10. Half of the league is gone from contention, and the Justice are still in it. Like, that alone should be surprising, but it's not. It's surprising that the Paris Eternal are not in the top half of the league in terms of the playoffs. They're not one of the 10 teams still alive right now. But it's not surprising to me that they lost to a Washington Justice team that is just incredible. They know how to support Decay. They play around Decay in a way that very few teams have had a player to play around like that. And it just allows Decay to just frag and to just go off on other players, and it just allows him to just win matches and win maps and win fights. And it's a real shame to see the Paris Eternal go out in the way that they have, because the Paris Eternal really have been good all season. They've been one of the most entertaining teams to watch all season. Their Summer Showdown win is still one of my highlights of the season. But the Justice have just looked so good running this composition that is not really meta. No other teams are really running this composition, but the Justice are by far the best team on it, and they've been able to push good teams to the limits. They pushed the Shock to the limits, and they crushed the Eternal, who I would say are not looking like the strongest team in this meta right now. The other losers bracket match that took place was the Florida Mayhem beating the LA Gladiators. It's really funny to me that there's this triangle that exists with the Mayhem, the Gladiators, and the Valiant. The Mayhem are undefeated against the Gladiators this season. The Gladiators are undefeated against the Valiant this season, and the Valiant are undefeated against the Mayhem this season. It is a triangle that continues on, and it still is true. Mayhem with a good win over the Gladiators, eliminating them from the playoffs. And in the winners bracket, like I said before, the Philadelphia Fusion dismantling the LA Valiant. And the Shock with a victory over the Atlanta Reign. Close for about one map. The rest of the series was pretty dominant and one-sided for the Shock. So we have a setup for Fusion versus Shock NA Finals, which I'm super excited for, but I won't give my thoughts on that too much. And in the losers bracket, we will have the Atlanta Reign taking on the Florida Mayhem, and the LA Valiant taking on the Washington Justice, which I still am baffled by the fact that we are legitimately talking about the Washington Justice as serious contenders for the championship. I wanted to take just a little bit of time to talk about one little thing, though, with the teams that are remaining. We have 10 teams remaining, obviously, as I said. The Fusion, Shock, Mayhem, Reign, Valiant, and Justice in North America, and in Asia, it is Shanghai, Seoul, New York, and Guangzhou. So those are our 10 teams. And realistically, obviously, 4 of those teams are going to make the Grand Finals tournament, and 6 of them will not. And also, realistically, not every team has a realistic shot at winning the championship. To me, right now, there's only 6 teams that I look at as teams that, if they are hitting their peak, have a chance to win. There are 4 teams right now that I just think can't do it, that they just haven't proven it, and I think that it is just an uphill battle and a task that they just cannot accomplish, to the point where I think that it is super clear to me right now which 6 teams have a chance. My 6, if I will say it, bubble teams. Now, the bubble is a concept, if you've never heard of it. It's essentially just like a sports concept for teams that have a chance to win the championship, and you kind of have 2 levels of your bubble. You have your teams in the bubble, who are your favorites, the teams who you think these teams are most likely to win, and to me, if any of them win, it's not a surprise. And then you have your teams that are on the bubble, slightly outside the bubble, who certainly can win, but they have an outside shot. Them winning is the type of thing where you say they're playing their best. Yeah, they managed to do it, but it was a tough task for them, and it's a bit of a surprise that they won, but it's not a crazy, like, you never would have expected that to happen based on the way they've been playing recently. And then to me, you just have teams that are just out of the bubble, that you throw them out, they don't matter. And I don't think you can even consider those teams right now for contenders. So of the 10 teams remaining, I have 3 teams in the bubble, 3 teams on the bubble, and 4 teams just completely out of the bubble. For out of the bubble, Atlanta Reign, get them out of there. I don't think the Atlanta Reign have a good chance. They have to play the Florida Mayhem. I think the Florida Mayhem are the better team. The Reign, in order for them to get through, they have to beat so many teams. I think they're the weakest team left in the playoffs right now. Atlanta Reign, throw them out of the bubble. Florida Mayhem also are a team I'm going to put outside the bubble. I just think that they have too tall of an order, and it's too much to ask for them to be able to beat the Reign, and then either the Valiant or the Justice, and then either the Shock or the Fusion. Like, there are 2 games there where I wouldn't favor them. So to me, the Mayhem, it's just the chances for them are just so absurdly low, because they have to beat so many teams that I think have just performed at a higher level than them, that I take them and I throw them out of the bubble. LA Valiant, throw them out of the bubble. I don't even think they beat the Justice, and even if they do, they maybe beat the Mayhem or the Reign. They got a chance there, but they're not beating the Fusion, they're not beating the Shock. They just have no chance. They throw them out of the bubble, they're out. The last team I'm throwing out of the bubble is not the Washington Justice, but the Guangzhou Charge. And the reason why I'm throwing the Guangzhou Charge out is because their performance against Seoul didn't really inspire me. It was pretty flat and lackluster. And I think when you look at the Charge, right, you think for them to make it into the top 2 in Asia, they have to beat New York, who I thought looked very good against Shanghai, and then either Seoul or Shanghai, who are both right now just playing better than the Guangzhou Charge are. And I think the chances are much lower for them to actually get into the top 4 because of just how daunting it is and the way that some of the other teams have played. I think it's very difficult. So Reign, Valiant, Mayhem, Charge are my teams outside of the bubble. My on the bubble teams, I have 3 of them, as I mentioned before. I'm going to start with the Washington Justice. The way they have been playing is very good. Obviously, they almost beat the Shock. I'd be curious to see them play against the Fusion and see if they can beat them, but the way they are playing is very good, and they are on a really high level right now that, just completely forgetting about their regular season performance, the way they have played in the playoffs, they have looked like a top-level team. They have looked dominant. They have looked strong. They've looked incredible. And I think if you realistically get another shot at the Shock, they could maybe win that match, and then maybe they beat the Fusion. I think that they are probably the most on the bubble team, where like they are the least likely to hit that peak and to be able to upset one of these juggernaut Goliath teams. But just how well they are playing right now, I have so much faith in this Justice team to actually potentially make a playoff run, which is just an absurd thought to have. New York and Seoul, the other 2 teams that I have on the bubble. Seoul, I need to see the way that they play against Shanghai before I'm ready to say they are an in the bubble team. But the way they looked against Guangzhou is very good, and I think that they have a really good shot at making that top 4. I think right now I would probably say Shanghai and Seoul are the 2 favorites to get in. My reasoning for having New York on the bubble as opposed to Guangzhou is that New York looked very good against Shanghai, where Guangzhou didn't look very good. And we haven't seen New York play against Guangzhou. We haven't seen them play against Seoul. If based on just the performances against their most recent opponents, New York looked very good against the team who we all perceive to be the best team in Asia. Guangzhou did not look very good against Seoul. So New York, I think, should be, in theory, favored to beat Guangzhou. And then if they have to play Seoul in the losers finals, well, we don't actually know what that looks like. But New York looked very good against Shanghai. And in theory, if Shanghai is the team that wins against Seoul, then you can kind of compare their results. And I think in that capacity, you certainly have an argument to be made for New York. To me, Guangzhou, it's the type of thing where maybe they can beat New York. I don't see them beating Shanghai or Seoul again. I just think those 2 teams look too good right now. New York has shown some highs where I think that there is still a chance that they can be a top 4 team. So that's why I have them on the bubble. And in the bubble, I have the Dragons, the Fusion, and the Shock. Those 3, I think, are the title favorites. I don't need to explain that. They are the teams right now that I would say have the best chance at making the grand finals and winning it in any fashion whatsoever. But we'll see next week what happens with all of these teams. I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below your thoughts on any of what happened this past weekend, what you're looking forward to next weekend, any of that. I would love to hear from you, but that is all from me today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this in the future. But that's all for me. I am going to get out of here. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.